Human language is daunted by the scale of the cosmos. Words fail us when we gaze up at the stars, trying to contemplate their significance and our insignificance. But there's a word that describes the feelings of awe, wonderment, curiosity and dread that fills us when we look up into the skies, the word numinous. And with the feeling of the numinous comes another big question. Are we alone? Are there other forms of life, particularly of conscious life, out there? Paul Davies, in this exciting episode, I want to deal with the biggest of big questions. Are we alone? Well, how could we be when in the observable universe there are 100 billion suns?
That's a lot, isn't it? Big number. Unfortunately, it's not so big that if life formed as a result of an accidental shuffling of molecules, that is, if it's a chemical fluke, that it would be bound to occur twice.
But what if you add to those 100 billion the number of possible planets? You're then dealing with an even greater figure.
Well, just another factor of 10. You see, people are very bad at number estimates. And although this sounds like an enormous number, and certainly true that the universe is vast, there are a huge number of stars and probably planets too, nevertheless, the odds against shuffling, say, amino acids, which we were talking about in the last episode, into proteins are just so enormous, like 1 followed by 130 zeros, as opposed to your puny number here of 1 followed by 20 zeros, that it just doesn't begin to scratch the surface of the improbability of forming life if it formed by accident. So if it formed by accident, we are alone. The only possibility of us not being alone is if there is something other than just a random shuffling process.
Paul, there are conflicting human emotions here. On the one hand, it's a very lonely thought to think that we are alone in the universe. Many of us would like the company of user-friendly species from other galaxies. On the other, we've always been very arrogant. We rather like to think that we're the centre of things. Where did the Greeks stand on this?
This same argument was raging even in ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago. The Greek atomists believed that the universe is nothing but atoms moving in the void. So if atoms can come together in certain combinations to form living things here on Earth, then they might do so on other worlds too.
Your old mate Aquinas, did he have a view, or did Christianity generally accept the notion that we were alone?
Oh, Christians traditionally have hated the idea that there could be life elsewhere. It causes all sorts of doctrinal problems for them. Not so of other religions, but Christianity has particularly difficulty, I think, with life elsewhere in the universe.
Let's reduce the scale from our 100 billion suns. Let's look at our sun, and let's look at one of our neighbouring planets, Mars. A lot of speculation about life on Mars recently.
Yes, Mars has always been at the forefront of speculation about life elsewhere. Remember that Percival Lowell, 100 years ago, believed he saw canals on the surface of Mars and thought they were alien beings who made these. Then our spacecraft went there and didn't find any canals, and for a while it looked like Mars was not only red, but dead too.
Oh, of course, there is the pseudoscience, which has a giant face on Mars, surrounded by pyramids.
The face on Mars as well, but we're not taking that seriously. The Viking spacecraft that NASA sent there in the 1970s were specifically designed to search for life, and they scooped a bit of the topsoil, analysed it in little onboard laboratories, and didn't find any compelling evidence, even for microbial life. In fact, the surface of Mars is a pretty dreadful place. It's exceedingly dry. It's very cold, rarely above the melting point of water, drenched in deadly ultraviolet radiation, and the soil is incredibly oxidizing, which is very dangerous.
But Paul, in the last episode you established that life occurred on this planet in extremely inhospitable circumstances.
That's true, and there's some speculation that Antarctica can reproduce conditions not very dissimilar from the surface of Mars, and there are organisms that live in the dry valleys of Antarctica that I think could live on the surface of Mars even today, so long as they're shielded from the ultraviolet. So it's not obvious that the surface of Mars is completely hostile to life even today, but nevertheless it's not a place you'd want to be stranded, not the kind of place you'd like to raise a kid. I think the real reason why Mars looks promising from the point of view of life is that in the past we know it was warm and wet. The photographs of the Martian surface show unmistakable signs of river valleys, and there were times when there was so much water on the surface of Mars that it's possible that there was even an ocean. So going back 3.8 billion years, at a time when we know that there was probably life here on Earth, Mars wasn't so very dissimilar from Earth. So I think, although Mars today doesn't look terribly friendly for life, in the past it would have been a different story.
Going back to the bombardment we discussed in the last episode, where the Earth was, our planet was patinated by large amounts of rubble being attracted to it, there was the possibility then, the argument, that life might have been introduced to Earth by that process. Given that rocks have been bouncing between the two planets, could there have been perhaps Earth life transmitted to Mars?
In my mind, there is no doubt that if material can travel between the planets, then so can organisms. It's entirely possible that microbes can hitch a ride on a rock and make their way from Mars to Earth or vice versa. We know that Mars and Earth receive a hit from time to time, at the moment, say on average about every million years or so, with enough force to splash material into space. And this debris can be scattered around the solar system. Some of it will inevitably be swept up by other planets.
So, Paul, do you think that there was life on Mars?
I'm absolutely convinced that there was, if for no other reason than it would have got there from Earth. This bombardment that took place and was so intense in the early history of the solar system would have conveyed an enormous number of rocks backwards and forwards between the two planets. And we know that Mars was warm and wet at the time there was life on Earth, so I think it was inevitable that some Earth microbes would have made their way to Mars.
So those little microbes piggybacking on pieces of rock would have made it alive and well across that distance?
It does seem extraordinary that even a microbe could travel through interplanetary space without being killed, but it turns out when you look at it that this does seem to be possible. First of all, getting blasted off a planet by a major asteroid or cometary impact looks pretty dodgy, but actually a large number of rocks can be flung into space without being unduly shocked or compressed. The Martian meteorites that we have here on Earth haven't been pulverized or anything like that, and I think a microbe could survive its ejection from a planet, and it could also survive the radiation in space because cocooned inside the rock will be shielded from the worst of the ultraviolet from the sun and from most of the cosmic rays too. So yes, I think a fraction of microbes could make it unscathed from one planet to another.
Conversely, could life have begun on Mars and then been transferred here?
I think there's some reason to favour Mars over Earth for the origin of life. Mars is a smaller planet, so it would have had less of this bombardment problem. It would be possible for microbes to live deeper in the Martian crust because it wasn't such a hot planet. And it's also easier to get stuff off Mars because it's got a lower gravity. So I think there is some chance that life began on Mars maybe as early as 4, even 4.2 billion years ago, and was conveyed to Earth in some of this stuff that was splashed off at a later stage. So it could well be that we are all descended from Martians.
How can we identify that a rock on Earth might have had a Martian origin?
Well, as it happens, in my pocket here, I have just such a rock.
I thought you were just pleased to see me.
This is a piece of a meteorite which fell in Egypt in 1911, near the little town of Nakla. Incidentally, it killed a dog. It's the only known example of a canine fatality from a cosmic object. And it's been cut up. I think this piece was probably collected by Douglas Mawson. Looks like any other bit of rock, frankly, that you might find in your garden.
In the first episode, we established that physicists, mathematicians, and other members of your profession are regarded as high priests, and I confessed to having a blind faith in your utterances, but I want you to convince me that that rock came from Mars.
Yeah, you don't know by looking at it that it comes from Mars. It's not red or anything. The first clue is the fact that this is a type of rock called igneous, which means that it's produced by volcanic activity. Well, now, meteorites of the common and garden variety were all bits of debris left over from the formation of the solar system, bits of rock that didn't get accumulated into planets. If something's made by a volcano, there's only one place you have volcanoes, that's planets. So it must have come from a planet. Did it come from the Earth? The Earth's got volcanoes. Well, no, because we got a pretty good idea of what Earth rocks are like. And when you study the chemistry of this rock, you find that it is subtly different from any Earth rocks. In particular, the oxygen isotopes have different ratios in this rock from Earth rocks.
So it has a Martian fingerprint all over it.
Well, at least it's a non-terrestrial fingerprint, and it doesn't match the moon rocks either. So where have you got that's a planet in the solar system with volcanoes? Well, Mars is the obvious answer. You look at the pictures of Mars, it's got some of the biggest volcanoes in the solar system. It's a volcanic planet. But even that is not a clincher. It turns out that the best evidence that we have that meteorites like this come from Mars, and there are about a dozen of them, is that included in them are gases from the Martian atmosphere. Now, in the 1970s, the Viking spacecraft, which landed on the surface of Mars, measured the different isotopes of the gases in the atmosphere, the argon and xenon and so on in the Martian atmosphere. And those isotope ratios match exactly the isotope contents of this and the other Martian rocks. And that's just too much of a coincidence. So they clearly do come from Mars. Nobody seriously doubts that.
Now, sadly, the Martian rock that you're holding that killed the poor Egyptian dog contains no hint of life, but I understand another meteorite from Mars does.
Yes, that's right. A meteorite found in Antarctica in 1984 contains tantalizing evidence for life, and indeed there are some scientists at NASA who are convinced that life has been at work in that meteorite. It's called ALH 84001, that's its code name. And there are three reasons why the NASA scientists are excited by it. One is that it contains tiny grains of carbonate, and to a geologist, carbonate suggests one thing, and that's water. And of course, all life as we know it depends on water. If you look very carefully with a microscope at these carbonate grains, there are other features, little mineral inclusions within it that suggest that some sort of bacteria have been at work. Indeed, if you saw these features in an earth rock, you would attribute them to bacterial activity.
It wouldn't be a line call. You'd be absolutely confident that it was bacterial activity.
It would be pretty certain if it was in an earth rock, but of course if it's in a Mars rock, you think again. And I suppose the thing which most captured the public attention when the results were announced were there are tiny little sausage-shaped features, little microscopic blobs that some people think look like fossilized bacteria. Nobody's claiming they're living bacteria, but they could be bacterial fossils. All of these findings have been disputed. The jury's still out on it.
Let's take the optimistic view that, yes, life did exist on Mars, may even exist on Mars. If that's the case, we can extrapolate to the wider universe. The probability is that many of the billions of stars we've mentioned have planets. Do you take the view, therefore, that life is likely to be percolating, bubbling away all over the cosmos?
Well, my own personal point of view is that life is fairly common throughout the cosmos, but I'm arriving at that point of view largely on philosophical rather than scientific grounds.
Philosophical? In
Yes.
what sense?
Well, because I personally don't believe that we are freaks, that that life on Earth is the result of a single stupendous meaningless accident, but is part of the natural outworking of the underlying laws of physics.
Is that an emotional need of yours?
Probably, yes. I'm coming at this entirely from the philosophical, emotional direction, not from the scientific direction, because the scientific evidence is very equivocal. As we discussed in the last episode, we don't know how life began, and we have no idea whether it was a unique event or whether it is something which is very easy to happen under the right conditions. I might say many scientists seem to think that it is rather easy under the right conditions, and they point out the fact that the basic building blocks of life, the amino acids and this sort of thing, are very common throughout the universe. The stuff of which life is made, the basic elements like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen and so on, among the most abundant elements in the universe, and therefore they say life is likely to be abundant in the universe. But we don't know that.
If there is a miracle, and as an atheist I find that an embarrassing word to use, if there is a miracle in the story of life, I find it in the growth or the development of consciousness. Self-regarding, self-aware consciousness. Is there, in your view, a likelihood that consciousness would derive in other realms, on other planets? Is that a part of the inevitability, the coding?
If we accept Darwin's theory of evolution as being a complete picture of the evolutionary changes that have taken place among life on Earth, then it would seem extremely unlikely that consciousness would develop anywhere else. Consciousness would be a quirky little byproduct of the blind groping of evolution in the same way that fingernails and eyebrows and so on have appeared. In other words, they don't
Some
have any
quirk,
deep significance.
some quirk.
We regard it as of course, immensely significant because we're the product of it. But there is no known law that operates in evolution that directs the evolutionary change towards consciousness or even intelligence. So that if evolution is blind, if it's just a blind groping through the space of possibilities, then the chances of that evolutionary pathway being followed on another planet as well, of the evolutionary history of our Earth being paralleled elsewhere, is infinitesimal.
Given your philosophy, which is an optimistic one, do you regard SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, as a worthwhile project?
When people ask me about SETI, I say that it's almost certainly a hopeless enterprise, but it's a glorious one and well worth doing, and I'm a thorough supporter of SETI. But the chances of succeeding, I must admit, are extremely remote.
Okay. A hypothesis, a mind game. Life abounds in the universe. Conscious life, despite its improbability, evolves. People decide to go on shopping trips, explorations, and these, of course, are passionately believed in by many, many people, most of whom live in California. What, in your view, is the likelihood of successful space travel?
My feeling about this is that supposing we do live in a universe in which not only life is inevitable, but conscious, intelligent life too, and that some large fraction of intelligent life develops into technological communities, you might then conclude that the Earth should have been visited and might still be visited today by alien creatures. It's an argument, incidentally, often used to argue for the uniqueness of life on Earth. It's the "where are they" argument, that if the universe was teeming with life, we ought to see more of them, and as we don't, therefore we must be alone. My feeling is that that if life does develop to the point of technology, it makes no sense at all to travel in the flesh from one star system to another. It's immensely expensive. It's one thing to travel from planet to planet within a given star system. We'll be able to do that soon. But travelling between star systems is quite another thing. And the reason is that the distances are so immense. The nearest star is 4 1/3 light years away from Earth. Now,
Or turn that into kilometres or miles.
To put it in comparison, light takes a second or so to reach the moon. It takes about 8.5 minutes to reach us from the sun, which is 150 million kilometres. So we're talking 4 1/3 years to the nearest star. Now, if the universe is teeming with life, as some people suggest, and there are many, many technological communities, it would make much more sense to log on to the nearest node of the galactic internet and download the video of your planet to your friendly neighbours, alien neighbours next door, than literally travel there in the flesh. The cost of travel between star systems, interstellar travel, is so horrendous that it makes no ecological or economic sense to do it if there's an intelligent community out there that could communicate with you very, very cheaply by radio or laser or something.
Then there's, of course, the problem of the timing. This planet's been around for 4 billion years, something approaching the human being for 4 million. That human being has been capable of sending even radio signals for about 4 decades. So you'd have to have some amazing synchronicities occurring, wouldn't you?
That's absolutely right. I think a lot of people don't realise this. As you point out, life on Earth has taken about 4 billion years to evolve to the point of technological society. Now, supposing hypothetically there was another planet out there where life got going at exactly the same time as it did here on Earth, there have been so many accidents of evolution, so many little byways in the evolutionary process, that the chances of that happening in the same sequence on another planet, reaching the same point of development to within 100 years or so of us, is infinitesimal. That's why I don't believe the UFO stories, because they're just too much like us, not only in bodily form, but in their level of technology. The UFOs, if you read the reports, seem to be just like the next generation of stealth bombers or something.
And there's a lot of them.
Yes, that's right. So just 100 or 200 years ahead of us technologically. But the chances of having 2 planets that would arrive at technology of that level to within 200 years after 4 billion years of evolution is just infinitesimal. And then when you take into account the fact that there have been stars around for billions of years before our solar system even formed, there could be planets and indeed life forms that stretch back for many more billions of years than life on Earth. And so the conclusion you arrive at is that if there are other intelligent beings out there, they'll either be way, way ahead of us technologically or way, way behind us.
In a previous episode, I quoted Asimov's term, the armies of the night, which he used to describe the serried ranks of those opposed to science. You might also argue that the term could be applied to the UFO phenomenon, the armies of the night observed by people with a passionate love of science. They love science to such excess, it would seem, that they've turned the UFO into really a 20th century religion. There's a paradox here.
Well, I think that the UFO scene really is religion with a thin veneer of science, that all that's happening is that the old fairy stories or Bible stories of religious visitation have been overlaid with technological language.
Paul, America's energetic pop culture has given us a series of fads. There's been the yo-yo, the frisbee, the hula hoop, and the flying saucer, all things I point out that spin. Now, the latest phenomenon is, of course, the bodily abduction, as big a fad as the yo-yo. The thing I found alarming was that recently I met and talked with a professor from Harvard who's a passionate believer in bodily abductions, having interviewed, he says, simply hundreds of abductees. Your view on this, please.
I've got my own theory about alien abductions, may not explain all of the cases, but they do have many features in common with lucid dreams. Now, I'm not talking about vivid dreams, we all have vivid dreams, but there's another type of dream state that most people will have spontaneously once or twice in their lifetime, and I've certainly had these dreams, where it's quite different. You know, in a normal dream, everything has a sort of wishy-washy quality. Well, in a lucid dream, things take on a type of reality which is every bit as real as you and I sitting here now. If you don't know you're having a lucid dream, and I always do, but if you don't know it, it can be quite terrifying. Now, one of the features of the dream state is, of course, a sense of paralysis. We've all had that dream of trying to run away from things. You get that in a lucid dream. It can be really quite terrifying, and I've had that experience myself. A sense of levitation, the flying dream, floating dream, is another prominent thing. The sense of a malevolent presence. If I'm having a lucid dream, I usually think somebody's broken into the house. They're standing at the end of the bed. They're in the room. You know, in a normal dream, you don't have a sense of touch. In a lucid dream, you have a very strong tactile sense. And again, in the lucid dreams I've had, it's usually a feeling of something prodding or poking me. And when I was a child and would have these dreams, I thought the cat was walking over me.
So you're suggesting that these dreams can be conflated into...
If you put together all these elements of a sense of paralysis, a sense of levitation, of a malevolent being in the room, and the prodding and poking, then frankly you've got all of the elements of the alien abduction scenario.
And perhaps choreographed then by mass media and Spielberg movies.
Once the idea gets out, once the stories get circulated, other people, of course, have similar experiences. And many of these people, when they describe how it happened, they say they went to bed, fell asleep as normal. In the middle of the night, all this happened, and they woke up in bed. And maybe their partner's lying beside them and knew nothing had happened. And yet they failed to see that they've just had a dream.
Okay, well, I can accept that, particularly if the dreams are then, to some extent, choreographed by mass media or given a form and structure. Look, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a final question, and that is the wormhole argument. The late Carl Sagan suggested that it may be possible for interplanetary, intergalactic, cosmic visitations to occur through the wormhole. Your response?
It's quite interesting historically what happened here. Carl Sagan wrote the book about contact and the wormhole and so on. And he went to his friend Kip Thorne at Caltech to check out if it could really be done. And so it was a sort of recreational exercise to see if it was possible to have a shortcut between 2 points in space that would enable rapid transportation from one place to the other. And it's already known that black holes can do funny things to space and time, and the wormhole is a bit like an adaptation of a black hole. And as a result of these theoretical studies, Thorne and his colleagues decided that it was just about feasible, not a very practical proposition, but just about a feasible thing, that you could have such a wormhole. But it had a bizarre twist to it. It turned out that if you can go through this wormhole and come out the other end a short time later, a few minutes later, then it can also be used as a time machine, can send you back in time. And so most of the theoretical work that's since been done is looking at wormholes in the context of time travel rather than space travel. But it does look like it's theoretically possible, but will be a very expensive exercise.
So fiction first, science later.
Yes.
We shall now enter a wormhole, re-emerge in another episode where we'll be asking the question, does God play dice with the universe?